So what do things like voting in an election or even just arguing about ideas with your friends have in common? Well, a surprising amount of it all points back to one place, ancient Greece. We're going to take a quick look at some of the huge ideas from this civilization that, believe it or not, are still a really big deal in our world today.
Think about it. Have you ever voted for anything? I mean, even for something small, like a class president or deciding what movie to watch. That simple idea, that your voice should count, wasn't always a thing. It was actually a pretty wild experiment, and it got its start way back in ancient Greece. The idea that regular people should have a say, that was a game changer.
Okay, so to really get ancient Greece, you first have to understand the land itself. It's full of mountains and islands, which made it super hard for everyone to unite into one big country. So instead, Greece was made up of hundreds of little independent city-states. The Greek word for one of these was a polis, and you got to think of each polis as its own little country, with its own rules and its own way of doing things.
And because every city-state was doing its own thing, they basically turned into these little laboratories for government. Seriously, they were all trying out different ways to run a society. Some of them had kings. In other places, a few powerful, wealthy families were in charge. We call that an aristocracy. And sometimes, one strong leader would just take over by force. They were all just trying to figure out the best way to live together.
But out of all these hundreds of little experiments, 2 city-states came up with ideas that were so powerful, so different from each other, that they would end up changing the world. I'm sure you've heard of them. Athens and Sparta.
All right, let's talk about Athens first. Their big idea was all about giving power to the people.
They came up with this radical new system they called democracy, which literally translates to rule by the people. Now, we have to be real here. It was not perfect at all. Women couldn't vote, slaves couldn't vote, foreigners couldn't vote. But for that time in history, the idea that any male citizen, a farmer, a stonemason, whoever, could actually have a direct say in making the laws, that was absolutely revolutionary.
And then you have Sparta. And Sparta was built on a completely different idea. Forget people power, this was all about military power.
The Spartans had this famous saying that their city was protected by a wall of men instead of bricks. And that pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Their entire society, their government, their schools, their families, everything was designed for one single purpose: to create the best soldiers on the planet.
So you can just feel the difference, right? In Athens, the big discussion is about what laws the citizens are going to vote on. In Sparta, the only discussion that matters is how to prepare for the next battle. They were 2 completely opposite answers to the question of what a society should be. And, these different governments lend to totally different values. Athens was this hub of new ideas, art, philosophy, and learning. They loved it. Sparta, though, they were suspicious of new ideas. They thought things like art and philosophy were just distractions. For them, the only things that mattered were duty, strength, and discipline. No exceptions. And this stuff really shaped everyday life. In Athens, if you were a citizen, you were expected to show up, debate, and be part of the government. But in Sparta, whoa. If you were a boy, your life was basically decided for you. At just 7 years old, you were taken from your family and thrown into a brutal military training program that would last for the rest of your life.
Okay, so we've got these really powerful but really different ideas kind of brewing in Greece. How did they get out? How did they end up influencing the entire world? Well, the answer comes down to one incredible person.
And his name was Alexander the Great. Now, fun fact, he wasn't technically Greek, but he was taught by a famous Greek philosopher, and he became a massive fan of Greek culture. And he's the one who would take these ideas and spread them farther than anyone could have possibly imagined.
In a little over a decade, Alexander did what pretty much everyone thought was impossible. He took his army and just went. He swept across the land, conquered the massive Persian Empire, rolled through Egypt, and didn't stop until he reached the edge of India. And everywhere he went, he didn't just bring soldiers, he brought Greek culture with him.
So what happens when Alexander's empire spread so far, so fast? It's not like Greek culture just replaced everything. Instead, it started to mix with the amazing local cultures in places like Egypt and Persia. This created a whole new, blended culture, a kind of cultural mashup that we now call Hellenism, and it spread all over the ancient world.
Okay, so here's the first big idea I want you to hold on to as you're reading. Key takeaway number 1, the Greek city-states were very different. They were not all the same. So be on the lookout for that intense rivalry between Athens and Sparta. It's a huge part of the story.
And the second key takeaway is this.
Greek ideas were too big to stay in Greece. So as you read, pay close attention to how Alexander the Great basically becomes the delivery guy for Greek culture, spreading it all across the map and changing everything.
So at the end of the day, what's the big why? Why do we even study ancient Greece? It's because their experiments in how to run a society never really ended. The questions they were the first to really wrestle with, what's the best form of government? What does it mean to be a good citizen? Those are the exact same questions we're still debating and trying to figure out in our own world, right now.